Welcome to the Infinity Academy from the Dice Gods. My name is Hydra, and today's video is the second of 4 looking at the core concepts and mechanics of the game, which is Infinity from Corvus Belli. Today we're going to look at the limited number of skills we suggest which you use in your first games, including the first mission which we will suggest you play, which is in the final video of this series. In our first video, we covered player turns, auto declarations, and AROs. We suggest you watch that before watching this video, so you can find a link in the corner of this video or in the description down below. These videos are for players who are thinking about starting the game of Infinity, have just bought in, or had their first few games. We'll get you ready to play your first games of Infinity with a degree of confidence and knowledge which will make it a lot more fun. But more on that in a minute. First, some info for you. As before, this video is good both for players who are looking at the full N4 experience or the cut down version of Infinity, which is CodeOne. All are welcome, this will work equally well. Second, if you're enjoying the Academy, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. If it's really working for you, please consider supporting the channel by joining our Patreon. This will help us produce more videos faster, and our patrons will gain access to exclusive videos and downloads related to the Academy. That will, in this series, include a download of the modified mission we play in the final video and an exclusive tactics video to help you with playing that mission. If you'd like to send some love, find the link for our Patreon in the description below. So first on the menu today, let's take a moment to look at the 2 core types of profiles for Infinity. The profile for troopers and the one for weapons. This is a standard trooper profile. In this case, a Pan-Oceanian light infantry called a Fusilier. You'll find all of the profiles for troopers on the Infinity Army app. Links to that in the description, and a link to our introduction video for this amazing tool is in the top corner of this video right now, and the description too. A trooper's profile contains their name, common characteristics, don't worry about these, their attributes, common equipment, and special skills. Then a list of the different loadouts this trooper can take, including their special abilities and points. First, let's look at their attributes. MOV is the trooper's movement. It has 2 values, as if you declare 2 move skills, more on that in a minute, you can move the first and the second value. But if you only declare 1 movement skill, you will only use the first value. That is always the case, even if you use move as your second short skill. CC is your close combat stat. This is used when you want to let your fist do the talking in close combat. For this stat and the ones which follow it, you'll usually see values between 10 and 15, with 10 being a poor value and 15 being good news. BS is ballistic skills. This is used in ranged combat. PH is physique and decides how well this trooper can dodge, throw, and stab things. Whip or willpower is useful for booping buttons, hacking, doctoring, discovering things, and fixing stuff. Arm is armor. This helps the trooper shrug damage. More is better, and this stat will range between 0 and 10, depending on the type and quality of the unit you're looking at. BTS is the biotechnological shield of the trooper. This is their defense against hacking, electromagnetic, and viral weaponry. Ranges are typically, but not always, between 0 and 9, with more being better. W represents the number of wounds your trooper can take. When this gets to 0, they fall unconscious. In Infinity, you're typically looking at between 1 and 3 wounds maximum. Some units, though, are robotic or a machine, and they will have an STR or structure value in place of wounds. This works exactly the same as wounds, but wounds can be healed by a doctor, whereas structure needs an engineer. S is silhouette, which defines the 3D volume a trooper takes up and is used for deciding if you can or can't see something. AVA is availability. This is how many of this trooper you can have in a list. Skills and equipment represent the training and tools that the trooper brings to the board. Weaponry is the giddy stuff which the trooper has. SWC is support weapons cost. Infinity games use points values for units to define game size and typically run between 150 and 400 points. For every 50 points of game, you will receive 1 SWC to spend. SWC typically appears on big guns, units with sneaky tricks, and specialist troops. So a 300 point game, the most common you'll play in Infinity, would have 6 SWC for you to spend on stuff which makes things go boom. C is the points cost for that trooper loadout. As mentioned above, you'll have between 150 and 400 points to spend in a typical game, which these points go towards. For your first game, we recommend that you ignore BTS, silhouette, or skills and equipment, and only use the first gun on the left in weaponry and the last listed melee weapon. Does that remove most of the flavour? Yes, it does, but it also means that you only need to worry about core mechanics, and that's more than enough for your first games, believe me. Speaking of weaponry, this is a weapon profile for the most common gun in the game, the combi rifle. These profiles give you the weapon's name, obviously, and one thing that you'll notice is that all factions share weapons of the same name. This is a great thing about Infinity because the weapons are identical between factions. So a Pan-Oceanian combi, like this one, is the same as a combined army combi rifle. They're exactly the same. That helps with learning the game, as when you remember what a gun does once, you'll know it whenever you see it, both when your opponent is fielding them and when you get your 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 20th faction. The next information on this profile is range bands. A weapon will have certain ranges where it is more or less accurate, giving you a positive or negative modifier to your BS when you use it at those ranges. In this diagram, we can see that the combi gives a +3 bonus to shots from 0 to 16 inches, a -3 modifier for shots between 16 and 32 inches, and -6 from 32 inches to 48 inches. And it can't hit anything beyond 48 inches in range. By comparison, this is a missile launcher. This has a -3 modifier from 0 to 8 inches, no modifier from 8 to 24 inches, and +3 from 24 to 40 inches, then -3 from 40 to 96 inches, making it a much better long-range weapon than the combi. Let's go back to the combi. The next column is the damage of the weapon. The bigger the number, the better here. Most common weapons are between 11 and 15 on this stat. This is only used when you come to one of your victims making a save, but we'll explain that in a future video. Next is the B, or burst value. This is how many dice you throw when performing a BS attack skill in your active phase. So the combi rifle throws 3 dice, each of which can hit, crit, or miss. Then we're on to ammo. Infinity has a lot of different ammo types which can do all kinds of filthy and disgusting things, and we highly suggest ignoring them on your first games. Treat all weapons as having the N, or normal ammo. Again, yes, this is a nerf, but again, first games are better spent getting key concepts down rather than trying to remember what AP plus XP does, and whether you're better using breaker or EM ammunition. Saving attribute defines what someone who is hit by this weapon uses to save. Again, for your first games, we recommend using ARM only, just to avoid confusion. Traits cover any limitations, abilities, or templates which are used by this weapon. These can again be ignored for now. As a quick refresher, during your active phase, you'll be spending orders, and with each order spent, you can complete 2 short skills. We're diving into skill next, but here's a quick refresher on how you actually spend an order. So the active player declares which trooper they're going to activate, and then declares their first short skill. The active player declares any AROs. The active player declares their second short skill. The reactive player declares any new AROs. All AROs which have been declared are checked to ensure they're valid, and then we move into the resolution step where dice fly about the table, the blood flows, bodies get blasted apart, and it all gets a bit violent. Well, we've mentioned them enough, and now it's time to discuss the skills. We're only going to do 5 of the 40 or so skills which exist, as those are the only 5 that you'll need in your first games. These are all short skills, which means that you can complete 2 per order. There are long skills, which take an entire order to do, but we're going to leave those alone for now. One important detail to note, pre-measuring of movement and ranges is not permitted in Infinity. There are certain specific situations where you can measure a trooper's 8-inch zone of control, but as a rule, pre-measuring is a no-no. You declare, then you find out whether you can actually hit, whether it's in range, whether it's achievable. Another important note is that you can only declare move twice in one order. All other skills can only be declared once. So move is fine. Shoot is not, no matter how much fun it would be. Move shoot, however, tickety-boo, no issue whatsoever. So we'll start with the second most simple skill in the game. Move. As the name implies, this lets you move your trooper up to their first movement value for the first move short skill you declare, and then up to the second movement value if you declare a second move skill. As mentioned in the profile section, you always use the first MOV value for the first movement skill that you declare in an order. That is true even if you declare move as your second short skill. The only time the second MOV value comes into it is if you declare move as your skills in an order. And a quick note on movement measuring in Infinity. You measure movement from and to the same point on the base of your trooper. Not a part of the trooper, or from different parts of the base. Note that you don't have to move the full move value. That's just the maximum that you can do. So with our trusty Fusilier, their first move value is 4. So they can move up to 4 inches with a move short skill. If they move again, they can move up to an additional 4 inches. But if you wish, you can move 2 inches, 3 inches, 1 inch, whatever's necessary. You don't have to use the full amount. Our next skill is a little more fun. It's the BS attack, though you will often hear it called shoot. As the name implies, this is where you unleash the destructive power of your trooper's gun or weapon on their target. You declare the skill, the weapon you will use, and who will be targeted, as in step 1 or 3 as part of the normal spending and order process we spoke about earlier. But then figure out and resolve what actually happens during that BS attack in the resolution step, step 6. So how do you shoot? As I mentioned a moment ago, you declare your target and the weapon that you will use when you declare the BS attack skill. If your weapon has a burst greater than 1, and you're the active player, and there is more than one target visible, you can split the burst among different enemy troopers or focus down just one. The choice is yours. But you fire your weapon at the same point, even if you're moving, so you can't run across the board and take the first shot as you start, the second shot halfway through, and the third shot at the end with a combi rifle. You have to let loose your burst of 3 all at the same point during your movement. Going back to the spending and order process, when all skills, including arrows, have been declared, it's time to enter the resolution step and figure out how it all goes down. During this process, if there are multiple combats to be resolved, it is the active player who decides which order the combats are resolved in. In the scale of things, it makes no difference within the game, as all skills declared in an order are always resolved, even if one of them ends up in the death of one of the troopers involved. This is because, as we discussed in the last video, everything happens in an order simultaneously. So, as we move into the resolution step of spending the order, the active player decides on the first combat to resolve, and then we move through a process. Now this is a key process, as this is the same process with slight modifications that you will use for CC attacks and, when it's time, hacking attacks. So learning this one and getting this right is pretty important. So how does it work? With all combatants decided, the active player chooses the first combat and, assuming that the reactive player is spending an ARO to respond to the attack, both players run through the following process. Check line of fire, check range, check for cover, check the BS stat of their trooper, apply any modifiers to that BS stat, let their opponent know what their success value is, that is the core stat with all modifiers applied, confirm the volume of dice to be rolled, roll the dice, check the results, make saving throws, remove casualties and apply effects. Again, bear in mind that these are simplified rules, so we will be folding in more detail here later. I know I keep mentioning this, but if you're just jumping into the video for a refresher on BS attacks, I don't want you to think that this is all there is to it, then go to a tournament based on how simple this game is and have a really bad day. Now let's dive into the specifics. Line of fire. Simply put, this is, can your dude see the other dude? Get down, have a look, check. Your trooper fills a space extending up from their base in a cylinder to, for now, roughly the height of the mini if it was stood up straight. This is called the silhouette, which we mentioned in the profile section before. You ignore these sticky out guns and bits and pieces. If your silhouette can see your target's silhouette, you have line of sight. And if you can see them, they can see you. This is called reciprocal line of sight. Next, to the tape measure. Check the distance between the troops using the closest points on their bases. Compare that to your weapon profile and make sure you're within the maximum range of your weapon, and make a note of what, if any, range modifiers are applied. So, for this combi, if you're at 7 inches, you would receive a +3 modifier to your shots or shots. If, however, you're at 17 inches, that becomes a -3 modifier. The combi is all about that up-close violence. On to cover. There are 2 types of cover, partial and total. Let's start with total. As the name implies, that means your trooper is totally covered by terrain. This, therefore, will have been dealt with the line of fire bit above, as if you're completely covered by terrain, there is no line of sight. Partial cover, however, is something else. The definition can be put this way. If the targeted trooper has base-to-base contact with terrain, which is in the line of fire between it and the trooper targeting it, then that trooper has partial cover. So again, no base-to-base contact, no cover. Base-to-base, but it's not between the attacker and the attackee, no cover. Base-to-base and betwixt the attacker and the attackee, cover. So what does cover do? It gives a nice, simple -3 modifier to the attacker if the target of the BS attack is in partial cover. Easy as that. Let's do some cover examples. If the enemy is to the left here, then Mike the Nox is in cover, out of cover, back in cover, and yes, if you're not in base to base, you're not in cover. It's as simple as that. Here, the angle is a bit weird. So, in this position, Mike gets cover from Matt, but not if Matt is stood here. If it's a partial call, then chat with your opponent before you place the miniature. And that's the core of cover. If in doubt, discuss and agree before the game or before completing a movement skill or declaration. With range and cover sorted out, it's time to work out your success value. Start with the basic BS value from your trooper's profile, then apply the range modifier, if any, and the cover modifier, if any. You now have your success value. That's your target number when you start rolling, and you're aiming for that or beneath it. Confirm the number of dice to be rolled. This will mostly impact the active player if they are targeting multiple troops with a single BS attack. as their burst will be spread across those, but the active player gets to decide how and where that burst will be split. Now we roll dice. If the reactive trooper is spending an ARO, that is a face-to-face roll. If the reactive player is not spending an ARO, then it just becomes a normal roll. Equally, and it can happen, if the reactive player is spending an ARO, but the reactive player is not reacting to them, then the reactive player would get a normal roll. What these specific dice rolls mean will be covered in the next video. But in brief, we're going to cover an overview of a face-to-face roll so that it starts to make a little bit more sense. Once you have all of the above resolved and you know what your success value is, both players roll their dice in clear view of each other. Any die which is higher than the success value of the rolling player is removed as a failure. The remaining dice are then compared. Any die which are under or equal to the success value of the rolling player cancel any and all successful dice of the opposing player which are of a lower value. Don't worry, there'll be examples in a minute. If either player rolls the exact success value that they need, this is a critical success, also known as a crit. This cancels all successful non-crit rolls of the opponent after the step above for cancellation has been completed. Note that a crit even cancels hits from enemies which have a higher value but are not crits. Again, examples coming, bear with me. Additionally, every crit of a BS attack causes the targeted unit to make 2 saves instead of the usual 1. And if both players roll a crit, well, I'm glad you asked. Then all dice are cancelled and nothing happens. So let's run through a totally not staged and set up example. You ready? Our good friends Nox Mike and Securitate Matt are stood out in the open being very irresponsible with firearms. Never do this, kids. Mike is the active player and Matt reactive, so following the standard order process, Mike declares idle as his first short skill. Matt AROs with BS attack using his combi rifle, and Mike declares his second short skill as BS attack with his combi rifle targeting Matt. So, we're on for a face-to-face roll. First, we check the distance. In this instance, we're at 8 inches, so checking the combi rifle stats, both players get a +3 range modifier. There's no cover, so no modifiers for that. Next, we look at stats. Mike's, being a Nox, has a base BS of 11, whilst Matt has a BS of 12. This gives Mike a success value of 14 when the +3 range modifier is added, and Matt a success value of 15, again with the range modifier added. Mike, being active, has a burst of 3, so he is rolling 3 dice. Matt, being reactive, using an ARO, only has a single die to respond. Rolling together at the same time, Mike rolls an 18, a 4, and a 12, where Matt rolls a 10. First, we remove Mike's 18, as that is a miss as it exceeds his success value of 14. Next, we compare the successes which remain. Matt's 10 is higher than Mike's 4, so the 4 is cancelled. But Mike's 12 is higher than Matt's 10, so the 10 is cancelled, and Mike scores a single hit on Matt. After that, Matt would make a saving throw, and depending on how that went, he would be there or not. We will cover dice rolls and saving throws in the next video with more examples, but that should give you an insight into the gist of how this works. But what if you don't want to shoot back? What if the success value is so awful it's just not a good idea? Well, that's where our next skill comes in. Dodge, as the name suggests, is a skill which lets your trooper get out of the way of something awful. You will complete a skill check against the pH physique value of your trooper, and if you succeed, you can move up to 2 inches in the direction of your choice. Note, you can move, you don't have to move. You can complete a dodge where your trooper stays still and ducks and weaves out of the way of the fire but doesn't change position. Dodge is a great skill as it can be used against multiple attacks simultaneously, but you only ever roll a single dice for a dodge. For example, Nox Mike moves around the corner as his first short skill and finds himself under the guns of the Securitate Matt, his friend Joel, and their buddy Alex. They all, rather rudely if you ask me, arrow to his move skill with a BS attack. Not fancying his odds, Mike decides to dodge to avoid all of their shots. Being a dodge, Mike rolls a single PH check, and if he succeeds, this single result is compared to any and all attacks made against him on this order. That one dice can then nullify and avoid all 3 incoming shots from Matt, Joel, and Alex, no matter how many there are. If Mike gets a better result, he can cancel all 3. So let's work this out for a moment. Matt and Alex are both carrying combi rifles and are within 16 inches at the point of which Mike had his moment of bravery. This gives them +3 to their BS skill for range. Joel is rocking a heavy machine gun. He's over 16 inches away, which is good range for the far-reaching HMG, so he'll also get +3 to hit. Dodge, it's not affected by range, so there are no range modifiers for Mike's dodge. Mike is not in cover, so there's no cover mod for the attackers. Dodge is also not affected by cover either, so even though Matt and Joel are in cover, there is no impact to Mike's dodge for that. Now we come to the success value. Active player Mike has a physique pH of 10, has no modifiers, so he's dodging on a 10, giving him a 50% chance of success and failure on a d20. The 3 Securitate are all at BS 12 for their base stat, +3 for range, so all 3 have a success value of 15. 1 die for Mike, 1 die for each of the attackers. The roll happens and Mike scores a very respectable 9, but it's not a crit. Matt scores an 8, Joel gets a 5 with his HMG, and Alex gets a 12. All 3 succeed. But when we compare the results, Mike's 9 cancels both Matt's 8 and Joel's 5, as they've scored lower than his roll. However, Deadeye Alex isn't falling for Mike's slippery ways and scores a hit with his 12. As I mentioned before, we'll cover the dice rolls in more depth in the next video, but this should give you some guide as to how dodge works on a general basis. Now things get up close and personal with the CC attack skill. This happens when troopers are in base-to-base contact and the fists start flying. The skill uses the CC stat, and you'll quickly notice that certain troopers are expert in close combat and so have a base CC stat which is higher than 20. This wouldn't seem to make a lot of sense when you're rolling a 20-sided dice. How this works is that you take the amount over 20 that the stat is and add that to any CC attack dice rolls that you make, with any result that comes in to 20 or more resulting in a crit. For example, here's Shinobu Kitsune, an Oniwaban of the Japanese Successionist Army. Say all that twice quickly. Shinobu has a CC of 25, so whatever she rolls on the dice has 5 added to it automatically, making the minimum amount that she can score in close combat a 6. That would be a 1 on the dice plus the 5 which her stat is over 20. It also means that she crits on any dice roll over 14, as any value over 14 will come to 20 or more when you add the extra 5 from her stat. Not bad, eh? The process for resolving a CC attack is very similar to the BS attack we discussed earlier, just a bit simpler. The steps are: check units are in base-to-base contact, check the CC stat of each trooper, apply any modifiers to the CC stat, let your opponent know what your success value is, this being the core stat with any mods applied, roll dice, agree the results, make saves, remove your casualties. CC attack is the same as shooting in its resolution. You just don't need to measure the distance, there's no cover, and with the cutback rules missing out special skills, your burst is only ever one. We will cover these skills which change and that are specific to close combat in a close combat focused video later in the series. So, figure out what the CC stat is for your trooper, and if you're adding anything for a CC value over 20, let your opponent know what you're after, they do the same to you, make the face-to-face roll, similar to the one that we did with the BS attack previously, make any saves, apply any wounds, and any results like unconscious. Note that during the order where you move into base-to-base contact with an enemy trooper to achieve close combat, they don't have to ARO with CC attack. If you have a close combat monster charging at you and you're not particularly great in CC, you might choose to unload your combi rifle, dodge out of the way. Whichever ARO you declare, however, the result remains a face-to-face roll with the CC attack from the enemy. If the CC attack doesn't result in every trooper on one side being knocked into a null state, like unconscious or dead, then both troopers enter a engaged state and can't just walk away. If one trooper wishes to leave the combat, then they must make a successful dodge roll out of that combat. Note that this can be done as an ARO. For our next skill, we're going to deal with Idle, which is the simplest skill in Infinity. It essentially means do nothing and stare at the sky for a second. Idle is useful if you're in a good position and just want to shoot somebody. You declare Idle as your first short skill, and then look for any AROs that come in as a response to that declaration, then shoot as your second short skill. That's why if you're going to declare Idle, then any non-move skill, always declare Idle first, as your opponent needs to declare their arrows to that Idle and may reveal an angle or enemy trooper or shot you weren't aware of. The Idle meaning that they have to declare any ARO that they want to use. You can then react to those AROs with your second short skill and not get caught out by something you weren't aware of. You'll also use it in those inconvenient moments where your movement isn't quite far enough to get you where you want to go to without putting yourselves at risk. For example, here Joel is running up to the corner to open fire on Andy, who is unaware of his doom's approach. Joel can get just behind the corner with his first movement skill, but not far enough to draw line of fire to Andy. If he was to declare move, then he'll have line of fire to Andy, but no short skill left to shoot him. So Andy will get a free shot or dodge in ARO, as Joel will have no skills left. Instead, Joel chooses to move up for his first short skill, Idle for his second, and with a new order, he then moves up to the corner with his first short skill and shoots with the second, denying Andy that free shot. Infinity is a game which is focused on missions, and those missions will include objectives for you to complete. And that brings us nicely to the last short skill we're going to discuss today, which have an umbrella term of mission-specific skills. These are usually completed using the whip stat of your trooper and occur as a normal roll, because you're normally doing a thing to a thing, not to another enemy trooper. These mission-specific skills will appear in the mission description itself and will boil down to boop the button, grab the box, doink the vending machine, monkey with the antenna, fiddle with the tech coffin, or similar. Booping the boop will get you the MacGuffin will get you the points, and the points will win you the game. It's as simple as that. And that's your skills. Most of these skills exist in ARO, but not all. It is not, for example, possible to move in ARO, but you can dodge, close combat, and shoot, with one big difference. As we mentioned, when you shoot an arrow, the burst value of your weapon is reduced to 1. So you're throwing less dice than the active player, but that's not always an issue. In our next video, we will cover the 3 types of dice roll which you will use when playing Infinity. So that's face-to-face, normal, and the saving roll. Obviously, we've touched on them here, but in more detail there. If that sounds like a daft thing to have a video on, give it a look and then decide. The video will also include a demo of how spending orders, skills and dice rolls work together as a cohesive system. But for now, that's it for the Infinity Academy today. We hope that you found this video useful and interesting and easy to follow. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments or track us down on social media. As ever, please like and subscribe, give the bell a boop if you passed your whip check, and if you found this video really useful, please consider joining our Patreon and helping this channel grow. Either way, thanks for joining us today, thanks to our patrons, and see you again soon.